some of you might have bought raffle tickets on the way in. Just to let you know now that half the money we're raising this evening is going to the Aegis Trust, which is an organisation aiming to prevent genocide through education. The other half of the money is going to People for Sudan, which is an organisation trying to help those still suffering in Sudan today. So, on behalf of the Aegis Society, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'll pass you over to Barry and Mukesh.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and really congratulations to all the organisers. You've done an amazing job, and it's so wonderful to see so many people so enthusiastically here tonight, and I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting and amazing time. We've got a fantastic speaker tonight, Mukesh Kapila, who I will introduce in one moment, who is really inspiring and has produced a must-read book, which he'll be available to sign for everyone at the end, about terrible events surrounding the genocide in Darfur. I've been asked to chair tonight's meeting. You won't hear much from me. My name is Barry Munslow. I'm the acting director of the humanitarian programs, which we run at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And many of the organisers helping things tonight are actually on the programs that we run there. So my background is in humanitarianism and the analysis of situations like Rwanda and Darfur that Mukesh is going to tell us about in the body of the program. The Aegis Society and People for Sudan, the Aegis Society in particular, have organised tonight's event. There is a raffle. They are hoping to sign up members to the Aegis Society, and they've got a campaigning and training program which will be available for people to sign up to, and a speakers program as well. We're absolutely delighted to have Mukesh here. He is a truly inspiring and courageous person. A man of intellect, but an intellect that combines with passion. A brave speaker of truth to those who did not wish to hear that truth. A fighter for human rights. His book is essential reading, and I certainly learnt a lot about the courage of the man and what he's been able to do thus far and continues to do for us. He's Professor of Global Health and Humanitarian Affairs at Manchester University, just down the road. He's a Special Representative of the Aegis Trust and a Board Director of Non-Violent Peace Force. The book, Against the Tide of Evil, was nominated in 2013 for the Best Non-Fiction Book Award. Professor Kapila has extensive experience. He worked for a long time in Department for International Development, so he's got a lot of development experience inside government, as well as for the big international organisations like the World Health Organization and more recently the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. He's had numerous awards, the Global Citizenship Award of the Institute of Global Leadership and Human Rights Awards, and we are absolutely delighted that he's come to speak to us tonight. So without further ado, I propose a warm welcome to Dr. Mukesh Kapila.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Good to be here in Liverpool, Barry, and thanks to Aegis Society of Liverpool, and particular thanks also to the Sudanese community here. I see them represented here in good strength. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to speak about yet, but to give me time to think about it, let's just watch a small film. What's happened to our press? Play it on the left.
On the screen, a triangle.
What triangle? So you're still on the PCs here. I'm an Apple person. I'm caught up with that. Why did you leave your home and walk so long on such a difficult road?
حذر يوم المنطقة قدام منطقة النهاية اللي معانا الأرواح لا أي شيء لا من شيء بقرب الأرواح خالص
Who was doing the fighting and who was killing the people? But tell me, why is Omar al-Bashir attacking and bombing your people? After all, he's the president of Sudan.
Darfur, Jibal Rwanda, النيل ثلاث مناطق بس في السودان. والمسير داير ما يكون.
Why?
طبعا دير الناس البلد ذات، يعني لما نجي نجوبه نقول ده سياسة الوطن ذات الناس البلد الناس السودان ذات.
I first went to the movement 10 years ago when I was head of the University of Sudan. Returning now to the Nuba Mountains in the middle of the rainy season, it's striking to see what 3 years of conflict have reduced this beautiful land to. What happened here?
This is the fire bombing, the one of Omar al-Bashir. And now with bed, they burned the house.
I can only imagine what it must have been like with this injury. And you can see, it's completely fused this arm. And you can see the way in which the muscles have been completely burnt off. She's lucky, actually, that this did not get infected and she did not die. What you see here is attack by Bashir's Antonovs on innocent civilians. So the people of Nuba Mountains are paying the price of our inattention to the atrocities and genocide of Darfur 10 years ago. And this continues right now in 2014. She lost her eyesight. How did that happen? I'm a doctor. Can I look at your eyes? So look at it. This lady Anna from the Nuba Mountains became blind following a bombardment of a village. I think something can be done for these eyes if she had proper health care. But that requires proper services for these refugees. And since you got here, what help have you received? What about these children? Do they go to school?
أيام مجال بتاع الأطفال طبعا ما عندهم مدارس عشان يبنوا فيه بالضبط كده ما في هنا لازم جالس يبنوا بس جدا الأطفال بعد مرات بيفرقوا الألوان ما لقى ريش كويس ما لقى الحاجات الحلوة كويس بيقوم بيدخل السوق بيجي بيسرق بيجي بيعمل يعني تقوم كله له في مشاكل المدارس اللي طلبناه الناس كل ما تقول ده المدارس يقول لك مش هيجوا عشان تاني نقول نمشي نخلي اثنين بداية إذا ونمشي تاني نقول يعني نقول تاني من جديد ونبدأ نفتح من جديد. أنت ما مبسوط جدا أنا ما أدري الناس. إيه ما مبسوط؟ إذا كان السلام من جد اثنين بكرة تاني أنا نقول نمشي نام. إذا كان السلام كله بالجمال ما نقول عليه ما نقول ولا يوم.
So, what are your main needs? What assistance do you want?
هو ده اللي الزراعة كويس؟ ده حاجة مهمة جدا والنسبة للأطفال جدا.
Despite the obvious daily survival needs, the first priority of the Nuba people is the demand for education. That Bashir's genocidal intent of wiping away their culture, their language, their way of life cannot be allowed to succeed. Here I am on Jida airstrip as it is lengthened and widened. This is now the international humanitarian capital in relation to the Nuba Mountains, but the irony is that this is not yet benefiting the most recent arrivals from the bombings in only the last few months because the hundreds of refugees that you see here are not convenient for the rules and regulations of the UN, and therefore they're not documented and they are not entitled to the assistance packages that they should be given under the Refugee Convention. Some 100,000 Nubian refugees have sought safety in neighboring South Sudan, but nearly a million are still there, trying to survive against daily harassment by the Khartoum regime. For the last 3 years, negotiations have gone on with the Khartoum government about access into the Nubian mountains for humanitarian assistance. But time and time again, Bashir has reneged on his promises, and thus it is now that the people there face a humanitarian crisis, a food security crisis, a health crisis. I traveled in the middle of the rainy season because I wanted to see the conditions under which people lived at this most difficult of times when the whole region is virtually isolated. It took us 8 hours to travel a journey that would normally take 2. At one moment, our road was also barred by a couple of anti-tank landmines, reminding me of what I had seen the previous year, which was whole piles of anti-personnel landmines and cluster bombs.
يلا مصيبة ده يعني مجتمع قام بنا بالمجهود الشخصية لأنه ما كان عندهم أي مستشفى من الحكومة مثلا أو من جهة ثانية قام بنا بالجهود الشعب في فترة أخرى طبعا ما كان الدواء مع طوارئ منظمة النسيج 11 وهذا ماشيين كويسين.
The population around this area is roughly 15,000 that we serve. And we run an outpatient clinic and then have an inpatient of about 20 to 25 beds where we can admit patients and treat them for whatever diseases and problems they may have.
Was the pregnancy positive? The malaria test? No. So you're just treating for malaria in case that's...
Well, there are definitely many challenges, many things that we have to deal with. Of course, besides the fact that we regularly concerned about bombings from the planes above.
بالله طائرة جاء من اتجاه شمال وصل سواء وكان ملفة على مستشفى كثير مرات.
أنا قاعد ساكن جينا من حدة طبعا جينا قال وكالطيارة طبعا جت نير ما سمعنا صوته لأنه بقول تكان
وبعد ما عمل بالساعات يلا قام بدأ في كشف.
طبعا كل البيت ده كان مثلا فيه طبعا كان ده بيت هنا والثاني البيت ده كله طبعا رشاق فوق مع نفس الكلام كان ضربوا نفس اليوم دقق البيت ده طوال رشاق ضرب الجن.
Did you go to the hospital?
طوال وصلنا المستشفى طوال شغل ده بالمستشفى هنا.
أنا كنت في نفس الصورة هو هنا وقام ضرب أنا موجود.
They dropped 4 bombs directly in line with the hospital. The first one being just outside the fence over there. The second one landing right here. And then another one between the hospital and the water point just outside. And then the fourth one was just on the other side of the water point.
So this was the angle of the plane.
هم أساسا هم عارفين ده مكان المستشفى وده مستشفى بتاع الشعب أساسا. وأساسا الحكومة السودانية وأساسا مستهدف المواطنين.
The Nubian mountains today appear to have been forgotten. There are no quick fixes to this crisis. In my view, we need 3 things. Firstly, a comprehensive approach that connects all the problems of the Sudan region together and addresses them simultaneously. Second, efforts to help the Sudanese people build their own capacity and resilience to continue their struggle against injustice and genocide. And thirdly, redouble our efforts to get accountability through international processes such as the International Criminal Court. I came away from the Blue Mountains disturbed but strangely inspired. The message from the Blue people to their brothers and sisters across Sudan and across the border in South Sudan is that through stubborn resistance and strength in their own capacity, they can not only hold on and resist evil, but ultimately earn a better destiny. So, what shall I talk about? I think people ask me why one had to go and make that particular film oneself. It's because the media are not doing their job. It's because nobody wants to go and witness for themselves. So, who are advocating for human rights, who are marching in front of number 10, who are picking up banners and sloganizing, is that if you haven't been to see for yourself, if you have not actually done anything to help the people, then all your advocacy, if you like, hasn't got any validity and legitimacy. So I know, Barry, you are kind of director of this humanitarian course, and I, coming from a humanitarian and medical background, and then moving on into more human rights and international development and international relations work, have come around kind of 360 degrees in believing that the most fundamental of all human rights is the right to live, obviously. And so, anyone who calls themselves a human rights practitioner have, above all else, got to make a practical difference. And the point of the film you saw is to show that even though this is now the 10th anniversary of the Darfur genocide in 2003-2004, which I witnessed firsthand, and I will talk about it in a minute. And as the film says, we are seeing in the Nuba Mountains, another part of Sudan, the same sort of stuff that went on in Darfur, except worse, even now. So, when we reflect on all of that, then I think it makes us at least question some of the assumptions and strategies that we employ in our work on promoting human rights and correcting human wrongs. The point of the film was not to show just the suffering and the fact that people are being bombed and hospitals are bombed. All that I think you can get a sense of and see for yourself, or you can imagine. But that people are resisting. The point is that this is not about hopelessness, but about the fact that, as I say in the film, I came away disturbed but inspired. Because people who have got nothing, actually they're not asking for anything either, but they're actually fighting back. And what can we learn from that? But let me start at the beginning. And Barry, I'm sure you'll keep me to time, though that may be difficult. Let me start at the beginning. People ask me, how I got involved in this business. And I say to them that my journey to Sudan actually started 10 years ago, 10 years previously. I didn't know that I was embarking on a journey to Darfur 10 years previously, in 1994, when I was a humanitarian official of the British government of what is now TFID, Department of International Development. At that time it was called Overseas Development Administration, part of the Foreign Office. And I was there to pick up the pieces after the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. And I just want to share one or two stories from that. I remember arriving in Kigali in 1994. I was the first British government official to arrive there. This was in July, and we were in the tail end of the 100 days of killing. 1 million people died in Rwanda, as you know, and this was the fastest killing rate and also migration rate, because a lot of refugees went into Congo of recent times. And I remember arriving randomly at a small location just outside the city of Kigali, which was a vocational training school, a kind of campus for, like a polytechnic, I guess. And it was just one of the many places I visited in my experience during the heat of the genocide in '94. Whenever I even think of the word Rwanda, I get this nauseous feeling in my mouth, because for me, these are images and smells, and particularly smells associated with the mass murders that I witnessed. I couldn't return to Rwanda until 18 years later, that is about 2 years ago, when Aegis Trust said, because I refused to return to Rwanda after my experience in 1994, it traumatized me so much. This hair you see, well, it's gone a bit white now, but it literally went greyish, whitish, overnight in 1994, well, over a period of 3 months, which is about as overnight as you can say. I never understood what turning grey overnight really meant until it actually happened to me. Anyway, I returned to Rwanda with Aegis 18 years later, a couple of years ago, and I traced my journey to exactly the same locations that I'd first been to in 1994. And I went to this polytechnic, which is a little school, which I was mentioning to you. And today it's functioning again as a school, and there's a little plaque with the history and so on. And then it took me that length of time to understand a little bit of what had happened 20 years ago, now 20 years ago. Because I hadn't quite understood what had happened in '94, even though I was there. So now I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine the radio, the hate radio in Rwanda, Radio Milkoli, which I'm sure you've heard of, sending out the broadcast, kill all Tutsis. So this little school campus was actually one of the headquarters of the UN peacekeeping forces, that the small numbers of troops that were there to protect the civilians in '94. When the message went out over Radio Milkoli, 2,500 Tutsis rushed to take shelter with the UN peacekeepers. Because the message had gone out to kill all Tutsis, they're cockroaches, insects, vermin, that kind of stuff. So then they arrived there, the peacekeepers, the Belgians and some Ghanaians and some Bangladeshis, I believe, and so on. They opened the door, and the 2,500 went in, the gates were closed, and they were safe. And the peacekeepers looked after them, fed them, watered them, and all the rest of it, and, they were okay. Then, about a week later, if less, an order came from the UN headquarters in New York, saying for the UN peacekeepers were to leave. And General Dallaire, who was a force commander, a great brave Canadian soldier, I'm sure you've heard of him, resisted this order. He said, what is going to happen to the people that we are defending? If we were to leave, what will happen? Anyway, the order came, you must go. Because there weren't enough strength, because the UN Security Council had decided that they wanted to pull these people out because one or two of the UN peacekeepers had got killed, actually more than that, but the whole thing was going to be released. So, the 20 soldiers or so who were guarding this little campus with 2,500 Tutsis packed up and drove off to the airport, which is only about a 10-minute drive away from that location. What do you think happened? As soon as these peacekeepers had gone, the Hutu militia marched in and said, "Thank you very much, international community. You have done a job for us." Even in Nazi Germany, they had to go from house to house looking for the Jews. Here, the international community had already done the job for them. 2,500 Tutsis were concentrated. I understood what the word concentration camp actually means. So then the Hutu militia marches 2,500 people down the hill, and you can do this journey now, to a little opening in the woods. Today, Kigali is a very urbanized place. Rwanda is generally urbanized. It's 20 years later, population and so on. At that time, when I first saw it in '94, it was deeply forested, woods everywhere. So they marched these people to the outskirts, into the woods, found a little depression, and they killed all 2,500 of them. Today you can go and see this because it's one of the many mass graves in Rwanda. So, what does this make you think of? Imagine if these 2,500 people did not have the faith and the trust in the international community to protect them. See, they believed in an idea. They believed in an idea that the international community, the values and principles of the UN would come and protect them. So they rushed off to take protection with the UN. The UN will save us. America will save us, France will save us. The UN will save us. If they hadn't believed in that, what would they have done? They would have rushed off up the... Rwanda is a very hilly country. That's why radio will believe this is, 1,000 hills. And they literally have, it's a country deeply forested, or was at the time, and it's very up and down, and there's a kind of lots of rivers and streams. So 2,500 people would have disappeared into the bush. Some would have climbed trees, some would have disappeared down a hole in the ground, some would have sort of gone down the river, etc., etc. And the genocidal militia would have followed some of them, killed a few, 10, 20, 50, 100, 500, perhaps even. But most of the 2,500 would have escaped. They would have been alive because they would have taken destiny in their own hands rather than believing in this kind of idea. So, that is my first core message, key message. The destiny of any country and its people lies in their own hands. And it taught me a valuable lesson. The lesson is not that you disbelieve in international norms and international rule of law and all the rest of it. Obviously, those important norms are important, and by and large, we're making good progress in the world with those things. Though, looking at what's happening around Syria and elsewhere, you would doubt this. But by and large, I think we need that. But I wanted to ask the question: who gave the order for these troops to leave? And we'll come back to this issue later. So that's where my journey to Darfur started, on the outskirts of Kigali in 1994, because I swore at that moment that if it happened on my patch, I would run away. And now you heard the expression, not on our watch, not on our patch, which we said. But actually, I may take a little bit of credit on it. I actually remember thinking of that myself. So fast forward 10 years, and here I am, not just a mid-level British government official, but the head of the United Nations, supervising the biggest UN operation at that moment in time. This is in 2003, in Africa's largest country at that time, which has spawned the world's biggest numbers of refugees and displaced in a conflict that had been lasting for over 50 years, almost ever since independence, with a small area, small years of tranquility here and there. And here you are, the head of the United Nations, been asked to kind of, supervise the UN operations there. So when I arrived, and this is going to be a very personal story, so that it's not going to be an academic talk. It's going to be more really to try and share with you some thoughts about what you would do if you were me. In other audiences, when we don't have the stage-like setting, this is where I normally stop and where I ask people to imagine themselves that they are me, arriving to take up the position of the head of the United Nations in Sudan. And then I take them through the story, but I think the format here, it's not possible to do that because of the sound system. But so we will kind of, I will take your part and my part at the same time, so to speak. So, imagine yourself arriving as the head of the United Nations in Sudan. So the first question you might ask is, why me? You know, why not? Why not Barry? Why not you? Why me? That's because Barry and people like Barry are white fascist imperialist pigs representing the West. People like him are black Africans. And this was a conflict going on in Sudan between the North and the South, between an Arab-led dominant regime, racist, against blacks, and suspicious of the West. So me, I was a perfect photo fit, neither white like Barry, not like a imperialist like Barry. Color-wise I'm talking about, not him personally. Or a black slave like him. This is the words they use, if you like to see. I'm Asian, I'm, second. So I was like a photo fit for the job. So I was introduced to this racist kind of mindset right from the very beginning. So imagine yourself now sitting in my office as head of the United Nations, and the office is about half the size of this room. With a big table made out of non-sustainable forest wood. Behind me is a big picture, and here I'm going to ask you a question. Whose picture is it? So here I'm sitting here on a desk here, head of the United Nations. And behind me is a portrait of a man. Who is that man? Shout. I'm the head of the United Nations. This is United Nations international territory. Whose picture is it? Who's my boss? Who's Banking predecessor? Kofi Annan. So behind the picture is Kofi Annan. This becomes relevant, okay? One side is the Sudanese flag, other side is the UN flag, and behind me is a picture of Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations at that time, and my boss. And a clean desk on which I can do anything I want. And then you hear about something going on in a country, in a region known as Darfur, far, far away. And you hardly heard of Darfur. And you go to the map on the wall, and you find where it is on the map. And you realize it's about 1,000 miles away to the west. And you're starting getting these stories coming out of Darfur. But villages being burnt, and people being, raped, women being raped, and your counterpart in Chad, the UN head in the neighboring country of Chad, brings up and says, "What's going on? We're getting loads of these refugees coming in from Darfur." And then you get into one of your aeroplanes. I had many aeroplanes because at that time the UN operation in Sudan was the world's biggest. This was before Iraq got going. And we had something like, something like 10,000 staff and $500 million program. So it's a massive operation. So you fly over Darfur in your aeroplane and you see some things. You see this village burning, but not that village burning. You fly over that village and you can see it burning. You fly low and you can see people running away on your little beechcraft. And then that village is perfectly normal. What does it make you think of? Is targeted. Someone is targeting this village and not that village. So you come back to your office to figure out why is this village being targeted, why is that village being targeted. And you plot the GPS coordinates of the destroyed villages against the population demographic data, the social composition data about the populations of the different parts. And you realize it's a perfect match. All the villages being destroyed are populated by people, by Darfuri people of black African origin. And all the villages that are not destroyed are populated by Arab people. So you don't have to be an Einstein to figure out. And this is why I say my journey to Darfur started 10 years ago in Rwanda, because immediately you think, I've seen this somewhere, this pattern somewhere. It's happening on my patch. So, you speak to the government and say, hey guys, what are you doing in Darfur? I've been there and I've seen all this thing. And they tell you that this is just attacks by brigands and traditional conflict between the settled people who tend to be of African origin and the herders who tend to be of Arab origin. And today, and this year in 2003, this is a drought, and the thing has got a bit under control, and we will kind of sort this out. What's wrong with that theory? Darfur is a region the size of France, and traditional conflicts happen in small parts, and by and large, traditional conflicts over resources or any other disputes, they're self-limiting, because the whole purpose of this conflict is to give a point, but nobody wants to destroy. There's a very fragile ecosystem amongst people, and the people of Darfur have been living together for 1,000 years, both blacks and Arabs. And yeah, sure, every year they fought when the Arab herders came in and they went onto the land of the African farmers. But then they kind of made out the wise old men of both sides, sat them down, they married each other's women as compensation, made love not war, and then it ended. And the following year the same thing happened, the following year the same thing happened, the following year it happened for 1,000 years. And in fact you can't tell the difference between who's black Darfuri and who's an Arab Darfuri, because all look the same, because they've been living together and marrying together for 1,000 years, right? But what happened in 2003, in a region the size of France, was simultaneous targeted destruction taking place. And this is way beyond the capacity of the local groups to wage war on each other. So what does it make you think of? That it can only be done by some authority which has the capacity to do it. And then when you get stories of helicopters and planes being bombed, then you realize that only one side, one group has the modern weaponry, and this is the government. And here is the second lesson. All genocides in history have always been committed by states. Genocide is a state crime. Not that crimes against humanity are not committed by all sorts of bad people, but genocide, which is an attempt to clean away a group of people on account of their identity, and the objective is elimination, is only done by governments. So you could see immediately from the evidence on the ground, as head of the United Nations, you could see, if you were in my position, it wouldn't have taken you long to realize that what you were seeing 10 years after Rwanda was a repeat of Rwanda, except the people were different, the context was different, etc., etc. So when you have that information and you give it to the government and the government denies it, and you are the head of the UN, what's the next thing you do? So here you are, sitting in your office, having been to Darfur, seen all the evidence, visited, appealed to the government, got the evidence. People are now, refugees and IDPs are giving you their own testimony about what's happening, etc. And everyone is denying this. Or rather, the government is denying this. What do you do? Someone. Speak up. investigating. You've been to fly over the place. You've seen you've done all the investigation you need. You're the head of the UN.
Speak to your seniors.
Sorry?
Speak to higher up in the UN.
Speak to the higher up in the UN. And who's the higher up in the UN? I'm giving you all the clues, guys. You're not awake. Whose picture is lying behind my desk? Kofi Annan, Secretary General, my boss. So you pick up the phone, and when you call New York from Khartoum, which is kind of 6-7 hours difference, or actually it doesn't matter, when you call anybody, when you call the local council, what's the normal answer you get? Well, the person you want to speak is not there. They've gone to lunch, they're in a meeting, they'll call you back. I mean, you know this experience? I think it refers to when you have a complaint to make against something or whether you're trying to get your things sorted out. So no one seemed to be in the office. You know, remember you're the head of the UN, the senior most international official of the world's biggest international operation at that time. And you're not able to get through to your boss, who's just appointed you. So what do you do next? What happens if you write to your favorite uncle or your grandfather and you keep on trying to contact them and they never answer back? What do? What? You go and see them, don't you? If you aren't hearing from your favorite uncle or aunt and you're getting worried, oh my God, what's happening? So I got worried. I said, maybe Kofi is not well. Maybe his son, who was going through a corruption scandal, is causing him a lot of problem at the time and whatnot. So I got in a plane and I get to New York. What happened in New York, I will not tell you, because you have to wait. You have to wait and see and read the book. Suffice to say that we went on, and I'll come back on this point to make some other points. Suffice it to say that our attempts to raise the world's attention to the first genocide of the 21st century failed, more or less failed, and Darfur happened. Remember what we said after Rwanda? Never again? And what is the difference between Rwanda and Darfur? Big differences. In Rwanda, poor old General Dallaire, he sent fax messages to New York when he had information to say about what was going on in Rwanda. Remember fax? Some of you may be old enough to know what a fax machine is. And in my time, in 2004, what did I have? Laptops, emails. So, genocide in Darfur was also the first genocide of the digital age, when we had the technology to communicate. In '94, in Rwanda, Dallaire probably had a mobile phone, which probably reached out somewhere, but he didn't have today's smartphones. And even in 2004, we were getting smartphones. I could fly over Darfur, take pictures from my smartphone, connect my phone to my pilot's satellite system, email system, and send emails to Kofi Annan with pictures taken by me on my smartphone, even as the plane was flying over the country, and even as villages were burning. The first genocide of the mass connectivity age. Never before have we known, in the case of Darfur, never before have we known so much, in such great detail, documented so furiously, communicated so fast, and failed so abysmally. The first genocide of the globe of globalization. The first genocide of the digital age. The first genocide of the age of technology and means to witness and record and communicate. Yeah? Compared to all the historical, even in the Holocaust, in the Second World War, we never really knew the worst of the concentration camps until they were liberated. We had an idea. That's why the world went to war. One of the reasons. So that's my critical message, why Darfur is such a scar on us. We failed when we could have prevented. The reason we could have prevented, I also call Darfur the world's most preventable genocide. Because we had very early warning and early information, even before I think the Sudanese government had formulated its full attack plan in its mind, that if we had intervened diplomatically and through sending the right signals, possible that many bad things would have happened in Darfur, but it wouldn't have been a genocide. There's a whole lot of difference between bad things happening, and bad things would have happened. Thousands would have died, maybe tens of thousands. But there's a whole lot of difference between terrible things and completed a genocide. So we failed, that's why I call it the world's most preventable genocide. I also call Darfur the world's most successful genocide. Why? And I'm not measuring success by the people, numbers dead, and so on. But the fact is that 10 years later, one can go and make films like this in Sudan. Never before in human history, since we started recording, since the word genocide was invented, or long before the word genocide was invented, but the experience was known in human history. You can see it in historical records and historians, without calling it genocide, because that term came in the post-Second World War period. But never before, in this most modern of times, even the Holocaust, the Nazi Second World War, lasted 5 years, of which the Holocaust part was only maximum about 3 years, 3.5, 4 years. The killings in Rwanda were only 100 days. But what situation in Darfur and its consequences for other parts of Sudan go on a decade later. So, but I have a more positive message. The reason these things are going on is because actually Bashir has not succeeded, and that's the point of the film. The point is that if he killed off everyone, we would not be here. We wouldn't know. But the fact is, those people are resisting, that you saw on the film, and that's in the Nuba Mountains. But the same thing happening in Darfur. I was on the border of Darfur last year, and if you go to my website, which is just my name, mukeshkapila.org, you can see the films that I made with Aegis Trust last year and the year before. So, that's a message too. And the message is that when you're confronted with evil, then the only way to resist evil is by only way to overcome evil is by resisting it. The book is called Against the Tide of Evil for that particular reason. But let me share another historical lesson. Having spent a lifetime, 25 years in international affairs, which has taken me in my different roles, both in the UK government, where I went on with the head of the conflict and humanitarian department for many years, and then the UN, and then the Red Cross. It's that these types of situations are all interconnected. And I'll tell you why, but with a little story. I happened to be in Paris, at the Holocaust Center in Paris. If you've not been there, you should go there. This is where the Second World War's kind of little, the artifacts are there. And in the museum, you will see the identity cards of the Jews, of the French Jews. By chance, I went to Kigali, to the Aegis-run genocide memorial in Kigali, about 2-3 weeks later. This was my first return visit after 18 years, 2 years ago. And I had taken on my iPhone sort of photos of these ID cards in Jews. And I took it out and I looked at the ID cards of Hutus, Tutsis, the ID card of the Jews of the 1940s, and they were identical. And I mean identical in the sense of color of the paper was the same, the typeface was the same, You know the little die cast that they were using with the S's, where if you use a lot, the S's and C's at the corners get a bit blurred. It was as if somebody had imported a printing press and had stamped out these ID cards. There was a direct connection between the technology of the Holocaust in Europe and the technology of the 1994 Rwanda genocide. And we should not be surprised. Many of the people who orchestrated the Rwanda genocide were actually students in France. Same thing, by the way, in Cambodia. The Pol Pot people, they were actually students, and they learned a lot of that craft of how to commit mass murder from Europe. These things are interconnected across space and time. That's why I like to say, others have said too, a crime against humanity in one place is a crime against all humanity everywhere. And the reason this is of importance is that when it comes to the response to these situations, particularly in modern times in Africa, let's continue to stay with this time, the reaction of the international community has been, let the Africans sort it out. So we have an African Union-led process, which the UN globally rubber stamps, but which so far has simply provided an alibi for the continuation of the violence in Darfur, while also expanding the violence in other places. In other words, an abysmal failure, even though we spend well over $1 billion each year on Sudanese peacekeeping and political processes, which if you were a company spending $1 billion each year investing in that, you would ask the question, what is the return? And that, if you link that to my earlier point about the shaping of your own destiny, you can see where I think one is going, perhaps. What I learned, and this is also a lesson from history, is that no genocidal dictator anywhere in the world has ever been removed except through the use of force. In the case of Cambodia, it needed Vietnam to invade. In the case of Rwanda, it needed Uganda and the Rwandan expatriates who had formed themselves into some army to come in and reverse. In the case of Idi Amin, who didn't quite commit genocide, but certainly was pretty bad in terms of crimes against humanity, he needed Tanzania to come in. In the case of the Nazis, of course, the whole world went to war. Never before has a genocidal dictator ever been removed except through the use of force. Now, the reason I say this is, I want to say this because one of my qualifications that he mentioned is that I'm actually on the board of directors of an organization called Non-Violent Peace Force. And this Non-Violent Peace Force is basically it's a Gandhian organization. It believes in how to bring about peace through peaceful means, and actually it works in places. But there is one exception, and that is when you're confronted with extreme evil like this. This is because the people who commit these things, crimes, they are not mad people. I mean, you know, when the psychiatrists tested Eichmann and all those people in things, they found out they were as sane as you and I, but hopefully most of you are sane. So, it's very clear that genocides committed by governments, state crime, is organized. There's a command and control, and all the rest of it. So it's very, very important to put a special gift to recognize that the act of genocide is not just the extreme end of a spectrum of violence. You know, nasty people doing nasty things, violence taking place in a country, whatever, and hey presto, then it turns into genocide. It doesn't happen like that. There are many violent countries in the world. There are many disaffected populations. There are many poor populations. Neither does poverty lead to genocide, by the way. There's no evidence for that. Genocide is an act of evil-minded, sane leaders who organize the whole government machinery around them and then perpetrate these things on a very scientific basis. Mad people do not commit these crimes. Mad people might go around Columbine schools and spray a few people and kill 20, 50. But mad people do not do that. When I went to Rwanda, again on this return visit, went to the southwest of Rwanda, and I came to a place where there is a mass grave of something like 5,000 people. Those 5,000 people were slaughtered between the hours of 6 or so in the evening and about 6 or 7 at night. About 2 miles away were the French peacekeepers camped. This took place in the darkness, in the quiet. Think about it. 5,000 people to slaughter using low technology over 10 hours. Actually, this is not the work of the Rwandan army. This is the work of someone orchestrating one group of population, turning on the other group on a mass scale. The whole of Rwanda was turned into becoming mass scale. And there's something else I learned from those experiences, and that was that those who commit these crimes, apart from the fact they're very intelligent, stupid people by and large don't have the intelligence to organize things on such a scale. These are very smart people. What happened in Yugoslavia, in Srebrenica and so on, these were educated people. This is not the work of ignorant people. You know, all genocides have been committed by elites, educated, university graduates. Just read Paul Potts' theories or Hitler's books, etc., and you will realize this. So you see, when you start understanding this special evil, and I can't think of a better phrase, then you begin to understand, or not, that a number of things. One is that genocides have happened all through human history. This was mentioned to you earlier. So when we say never again, we're actually misleading the world. It's like saying no one will ever, just because you stop smoking, you won't get cancer. Well, non-smokers also get cancer. It's better not to smoke and to reduce your risk. You can do risk reduction. But somebody somewhere could still get cancer. So it is with the evil of genocide and the mass atrocities of the genocide nature. You can do all the development in the world you like. You can educate as much as you like. You can actually create a society of as much democratic and all the rest of it. And all these things are worth doing for their own sake. To reduce the risk, it's a risk reduction approach. You know, if you have floods in your community, you build flood barriers. It's not to say that a flood will not take place, that we've discovered in recent years, but you do the rational thing and you build whatever it is. So it's not to say that, but a human experience that is part of our human condition since humanity was invented for thousands of years past. We cannot say it will not happen in the next 1,000 years, because it's part of us. Especially when you analyze why and who commits these evils. And you realize that these are ordinary people like you and I. While the Rwandan leaders or the Sudanese leaders who orchestrated the stuff in Darfur or Hitler, they orchestrated, but they didn't commit the mass murders. What they did was they turned ordinary people like you and I into mass killers. When you go to Paris and see the museum there, and you see the artifacts of them. You see, for example, the roster of the SNCF, the French railway system. And apparently the French railway system, the same company that exists now, they were booking the Jews, literally, they were booking them, you know, Pierre and whoever, carriage number 5, cattle truck number 5, and so on and so on. You can see the actual reservations that were being made, as if they were going on holiday. Now, and then the policemen went around house to house, and they're picking out who was a Jew, but just doing the job. And so when you talk to these people, and the records are there, they said, well, it's not our fault that that hardly a Jew survived in Paris. The Germans didn't do that. The Germans were busy fighting the Allies. Who had time to go around, from house to house, finding out Jews? They were busy fighting. This is all done by small people doing small jobs in a bureaucratic enterprise. And someone has called this, some Israeli researchers call this quite a beautiful phrase. It's called the banality of evil. Little acts that by themselves are quite innocuous, registering you to which cattle truck you're going to go to, registering your identity, They are innocent people doing their innocent job. But each person doing their job adds up to an evil whole, the banality of evil. And what you discover when you go to Rwanda is the bureaucracy that underpins the genocide, if you like. See? So, requiring the mobilization of whole communities means you and I. That means, just like if you give up smoking, you could still get cancer. So it is that even in rational, democratic, liberal societies, this would happen. It's like Ebola virus erupting out of nowhere. It's like somebody getting a cancer even though they've never smoked in their life. This is why societies like Aegis exist. Because the virus, if you like, if I can use that phrase, of hatred and other pathological mechanisms, which I won't go into because we're running out of time, because they're prevalent, their prevalence is there in society. It's a constant task to remain vigilant. And here's another thing we've learned through research. The chances of a genocide happening in a region, in a country, the greatest risk predictor is a previous history of genocide. So, this is why Rwanda remains vulnerable to future mass atrocities. So does Germany. And Germans recognize it. That's why when you go to Germany, and they've done a fantastic thing with their history, if you like, and how they've been open about it in Austria as well. You see this because you know the virus has been introduced. The point I make here is Darfur did not know this virus in its 1,000-year history as an independent kingdom and then through its various other phases it went through. Sudan had no experience of genocide. Plenty of violence. But as I say, it's not genocide and violence, it's the same thing. So, but now the virus has been introduced into Darfuri society and therefore Sudanese society. Sudan is forever vulnerable to this. And that's the tragedy. Let me finish by switching tactics and returning to our friend whose picture is behind my office wall. Who is he? So, what was Kofi Annan's position when Srebrenica happened? I was in Srebrenica myself, by the way. The genocide you heard about. He was a senior UN official in the UN. Who was a very senior UN official who gave the order to General de Lay to withdraw the troops? Who? Speak. Kofi Annan. And at that moment, he was Under Secretary General, meaning the number 2 position, one of the number 2 positions. But in the case of Darfur, in the case of Sudan in 2003, he was the boss. He was what Ban Ki-moon is today. You know, he was the Secretary General. And then who got the Nobel Peace Prize? Kofi Annan. So, my dear friends, to have one genocide on your hands might be considered unfortunate. To have 2 might be considered careless. To have 3, and then to be rewarded with honors. Are you surprised that these things happen again and again? And that's my closing message about accountability. We have created since the Second World War, particularly, global institutions, like the United Nations. And these are noble institutions. Do you know what the opening words of the UN Charter are? Anyone? This is a good test of Liverpool's education. And Barry, if they fail that, then you're fired. What are the opening words of the UN Charter? Shout someone. We the people. We the peoples. Now, I don't know if have any of you been to New York to see to the United Nations building? Okay, but you see photos of it. It's a massive building on the East River, and you will see described in the book because I obviously have a lot of dealings. The boss, the Secretary General, sits on the 38th floor. All bosses sit on high floors. My office in Manchester is only on the first floor, but I'm working on it. Well, it's only 2 floors high. Anyway, when you're on the 38th floor and you look down on We the Peoples, on the pavement, or as I say in America, which speaks a different language, the sidewalk. So the American edition of the book, by the way, has been turned into American words. So now's the chance to get the British version, if you believe in the English language. Anyway, I digress. What do we, the peoples, look like when you look down from the boss's window? What does it look like?
Insects.
Insects. And what did the Hutus say about the Tutsis? Cockroaches. And what did the Sudanese say about the Blue Nile, people of the Blue Nile, which is another region we haven't talked about? Black plastic bags. And the instructions from Bashir is, clean the countryside of the black plastic bags, black African people. They're dirtying up the countryside. Anyway, so you see, these global institutions have grown, and by and large, these are good people, we the peoples, and the charter is beautiful, the words are beautiful, like the Constitution of the United States and all these great constitutions, wonderful words, and they are meaningful words. And if we were to start again today, we could not find a better system. But what happened? Somehow the gap between we the peoples and we the 38th floor widened. And my theory, I mean, I can give you a long lecture on the psychology of genocide and the researchers and many experiments done about cruelty and why people are cruel. That's another lecture I gave. I won't do it now. About, you know, the genesis of cruelty, like the genesis of cancer, if you wish, you see, and all that. But what I want to finish on is this idea, this notion of what happened to the great ideals with which we formed these great global collaborations. And this is not an anti-UN talk. I spent a lot of my time in the UN, and I think it's a very noble institution. Every time 2 aeroplanes don't crash in the sky, thank the UN. Every time a letter posted in one country, and some of you still believe in posting letters, I believe, and it miraculously arrives in another country, if it does arrive, that's a miracle. But the miracle also is it does, and it's honored. That's the UN. So the UN is a whole, every time, when we eradicated smallpox, it was the UN, the World Health Organization, part of the UN. So the UN will work it out amongst ourselves through the lessons of the Second World War, that in an interconnected world, that was getting interconnected even then, it's not a smart thing to do other than to cooperate with each other. And hence, global cooperation grain. That's why the European Union is formed. This is why the European Union, which we all like to blame nowadays, or at least some people do, remember that it wasn't an economic union. It was a political union. The idea was to tie Germany in so that Germany would never go to war again. It's a political project. And one of the prices to pay for a political project is inefficiency. This is why those who criticize the European Union as the most successful example of conflict prevention the world has ever known are getting it wrong when we look upon it entirely as an economic project. Yeah. So my point is, all these things were created and all these norms are good. But then, if the leaders of these institutions get too detached from the people, as is happening also in Europe, in the European Union context, or in the global context, don't be surprised that these global institutions lose their legitimacy. So the two challenges we face, and your generation, younger people here, has: one, how to close the gap between the noble visions and ideals and institutions and the aspirations of ordinary people. Because there is an impunity. You can sit on the 30th floor and disregard, and no one will hold you accountable. So a critical message is that it is not the UN's failure in Rwanda or Srebrenica or Sudan. Because if you say the UN failed or this country failed, what you're doing is giving an alibi and you're smudging up the accountability. We have to identify who failed in their duty. So when a person, for example, in a botched up surgery in a Liverpool hospital dies, there's an inquiry held. It's no good saying Liverpool hospital failed. Someone has to say which surgeon, what happened, what went wrong, because then you do the appropriate accountability. Yeah? But in the case of the greatest of mass murders, you can get away scot-free. Get the Nobel Prize, he will be promoted. Even I never lost my job. In the sense that they were so afraid of me because I spoke up to the media, and that's how, I'll tell you the little story, and then I will definitely conclude. But if you don't correct this accountability gap between the leaders and the people, then these things will happen again and again and again. So at the heart of the ideas is how do we recapture our global institutions and build them to be what we deserve in today's world. What we've done is become careless for accountability of these things. So for me, the chapter of Darfur is not closed. It is not simply about indicting President Bashir before the International Criminal Court, where he is currently indicted. All that, obviously, right and whatever. But unless people who knew so much and did so little, who close their eyes and use their high office to actually obstruct through silence doing something, at the time it could have meant to prevent something. Unless they are held to account, then history is not closed, if you like. So accountability, even in a historical sense, is important. So that's one thing. Finally, very finally, what happened, and you can read more about it in the book, is being frustrated by the lack of international response. Even though I spent most of my time going around, traveling around different countries, visiting New York, seeing my bosses, none of them wanted to intervene because many different arguments were made, which you can read about if you're interested. It was all about processes going on in Iraq and people saying, well, let's bring peace to the whole of Sudan, and then Darfur will be sorted out because we'll sign a peace agreement with the north and the south, which ultimately led to the state of South Sudan, which is not exactly a peaceful one at the moment. All those things happened, if you want to see. But I tried for 3 or 4 months to draw the world's attention to Darfur, and no one listened. And finally I decided to go to the media and give an interview to the BBC, and it became world news instantly, within minutes. Now, this is an important point. Why, when we had spent so much time, 3-4 months, the second half of 2003, the first couple of months of 2004, trying to draw attention to the unfolding story of Darfur, even as we were collecting all the evidence that I'm telling you, with all our modern technologies, no one wanted to know, for many political reasons we won't go into. And then when I emphasize the word I, and this is, by the way, not a story about me, but it's a point I'm going to make. When I make one statement to the media, in a deliberate way, which is described, it becomes world news. And within 3 weeks, we have the fastest UN action that ever took place. A presidential statement, a Security Council resolution, and the first peacekeepers on the ground in Darfur, within 6 weeks. Never before in history the UN has a UN moved so fast, since I spoke up. But they wouldn't do that in the previous 3 months. Now, what's the point of this? The point is not to say I'm wonderful and all the rest of it. Obviously I will tell the story if that's the point I wanted to make. I'm maybe arrogant, but I'm not that immodest. Why? And this is a question, if you remember nothing else from today, please remember. Why? Well, I was nobody. I was the head of the United Nations Sudan, important position, important particularly also in the family of UN coordinators around the world, of which there are about 100, because it was the world's biggest UN operation, and therefore I was one of the most senior people because of the sheer size of my operation, and 10,000 staff, and $500 million budget, and 2 aeroplanes of my own, and all the rest of it, you see. Sure, I was important. But not that important. Just a bureaucrat. And yet when I spoke up, the world listened. And you all remember the Save Darfur campaigns and all the rest of it, and Mia Farrow's and all those people going on. Why? Actually, if you had put a monkey in front of the microphone, like I'm speaking now, and you had a banner here which said United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator of Sudan, and the monkey said the things that I said in 2004 in terms of blowing the whistle, it would have been world news. Well, the first world news would have been Monkey Speaks, but the second item would have been about Darfur. Point here, my dear friends, is that this is not me, but this is the platform I occupy. When the head of the United Nations, of an important country, speaks up and says, he could be anybody, he could be a monkey, the world will listen. It is not just what you say, it is the platform from which you say. So within 10 seconds of me blurting this out on live Radio 4, and then BBC World, and then all the Voice of America and all the rest of it, and I won't spoil your story. It was world news. By the time Kofi Annan woke up, this was in Nairobi speaking to the media about early morning, and at that time Kofi Annan was still asleep in bed, clutching his teddy bear, presumably Mrs. Anna. And so by the time he came up, he got up and brushed his teeth. This was world news. They could not deny it anymore. And they couldn't even rubbish me, because if they started rubbishing me, then I'd gone crazy, accusing the government of Sudan of committing genocide against its own people. And of course, the Sudan government was ballistic, and that's when death threats started, which continue to this day. I'm hoping you'll give me some protection in case I need it. So, but the point is that my position as the United Nations head was a symbol. It was a symbol of all the norms, hopes, and aspirations of humanity, and the cooperation and the growth of international human rights and laws and regulations coming together, vesting, if you like, a muddled mixture, all the same, in an idea of which you are the head. So you, in your job, pedestal you occupy, represent all the norms that we're talking about. So when someone occupying that pedestal speaks up, it makes a difference. Now imagine, my dear friend, if someone who occupied a higher pedestal, the man whose picture appears behind my desk, my boss, much higher things, had spoken out from his bigger pedestal 3 months previously, maybe we could have moderated the course of the subsequent genocidal violence. This is why, in the end, my final message is individual accountability and individual decision-making that counts. For me, my career was over. That's why I'm in Manchester. No. Manchester is great, and I'm very happy. Another career started, you see. But so many people are not willing to sacrifice to pay the cost. Nothing in the world is progressive without paying a cost. So if any of you want to make a difference to people around you, to society, to your community or whatever, beware. It's not free. It comes at a cost. And then it's for an individual to decide whether or not they're the sort of person who will use their pedestal. All of us have got pedestals here. Everyone has a pedestal. Humblest of us has a pedestal. And it's a question of how we use that pedestal. Do we occupy the position we have and hog it and stop anyone coming in it? Or do we use it as a prison or as a platform? Do we use the pedestal that we've got? In my case, a very high pedestal at the moment in time, but as I say, all of us have got pedestals. Do we use the pedestal to, from that, launch out and do some good? Or do we use the pedestal to consolidate our own position within our little universe of self-interest that we might have? That ultimately, my dear friends, is my final message. And with your permission, I want to show just a 2-minute video, and then I will shut up forever. Can you help me? Thank you.
We pass their questions, if they have any, to the end to this, and we will collect some questions and put those to Mukesh. If there's anyone who doesn't want to write it, then feel free to say it, then indicate with a hand. So let's try some of the written questions first of all. So we can bring them to the end and hand them in to ladies and gentlemen.
hardly a day would go by without an email report being sent to you detailing the latest incident, including time, place, very often even to which army unit was responsible. The reaction from New York, there was no reaction. It is as if the reports disappeared into a black hole. I've been unfortunate in somehow becoming a student of genocide. Having witnessed it firsthand, Rwanda, Srebrenica. In my view, those who stand by and don't even try to do something are almost as culpable as those who stick the knife in or who pull the trigger. So I started on a round of diplomacy, and every capital had access to intelligence information that I did not have, and yet they were doing nothing. So there was only one thing left, and that was tell the story as I knew it to anyone who would listen, anywhere in the world. And there's only one way to do that, and that is through the media. And I knew that this would be the end of my career anyway. It was cold, calculated fury that was driving me towards the end. Because there's nothing to lose, because everything had been lost, most of all the lives. And once the genie was out of the bottle, there was no going back. Not a single diplomat has been brought to account for the failure to act. In fact, many of them were promoted. When those who are in charge of institutions, charged with the responsibility to prevent and protect, fail in their duty, and there is no accountability for it, then Darfur will happen again. And happen again, and happen again, and will happen again. The land around now is completely scorched, as you can see, and the country depopulated. This is scorched earth policy. This is ethnic cleansing. This is a crime against humanity.